Paul Kumler, thank you very much for joining me today and
Thank you. My
welcome to the
pleasure.
channel.
Thank you very much. My pleasure to be here.
It would be really good to know your story, learn more about yourself. So if you could share some insights and give me an overview of your career path in general.
Okay. Well, first off, I feel very blessed to have had the career that I had. Kind of starting back when I was a child, my father was an engineer, and I always knew I wanted to be an engineer. In the ninth grade, I'd pretty much decided that engineering was the path that I wanted to follow. I went to a 4-year engineering college, started out in electrical engineering. And after taking my solid state classes, I decided that really wasn't for me. I really wanted to do something that was more mechanical and more hands on. So, mechanical engineering is what I majored in. Immediately out of college, I started in the aircraft industry working for Cessna Aircraft Company in Wichita, Kansas. My responsibility was environmental control systems, which basically is the pressurization, air conditioning, and heating systems on business jets that Cessna was making at the time. After about 2 or 3 years there, I moved over to Boeing, which was also located in Wichita, Kansas. That was the military division at that time, and I worked on a lot of special projects, mainly still in air conditioning systems, heating systems, cooling systems for weapon systems. But after a brief period doing that, my background, I worked for a structural manager, and he really wanted me to start doing structural work. And so I started doing aircraft structures design and analysis, and did that pretty much for the majority of my engineering career at Boeing. I moved to Seattle, Washington after about 6 years in Wichita, primarily because if you wanted to work on a new airplane program, Seattle's where you ended up having to go, and cut my teeth on the 777 program. My responsibility was for a significant portion of the structure, primarily in the nose section, and over time, a lot of the body sections, the mid sections that did the wing, over wing sections. Um, it was all structural design. And then I finished out my Boeing career working in airplane services, where I was the manager of the engineering services group. About 500 people reported to me at that point in time. And basically, what we were responsible for was any post delivery mods for airplanes. Post delivery mods, meaning interior reconfigurations, new in flight entertainment, crew rests, things like that. In 2002, I started working at Lockheed Martin here in Greenville, South Carolina. I was recruited by a recruiter to come down here and run the engineering division here in Greenville. And we did a lot of modifications to Gulfstream airplanes, C-130s, P-3s, C-9s. Most everything we did was military related. After 3.5 years at Lockheed Martin, one of my dreams was always to start my own engineering company. And one of the things that I noticed through the positions I had at the aircraft companies is contract engineers uh, were basically, and not to be offensive to anybody, but contract engineers are mostly mercenaries. They would come in, they'd work for uh, overtime, make a lot of money. They weren't necessarily your best employees that you wanted, and that's just a general rule. Not there are exceptions, of course. So I thought, well, we'll start our own engineering company where we can provide contract services, where all of our employees would behave as direct employees, and that's what we founded in KTM Solutions. My my goal in doing that was make a place where engineers could flourish, they could develop, they could be creative, they could love their jobs. We hired people who were passionate about their work. Um, to be probably 100% candid, we were looking for people who, if they could have their needs met, would probably do this for free. They liked it so much, and that's most of the employees we ended up with at KTM Solutions. had a fine group of people there. I ran that company for 17 years, and we sold it about a year and a half ago. And my wife and I have retired since then.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit more about your childhood, teenage years, and how growing up was for you back in your days?
Well, um, I had a great set of parents. My mother and father are both very involved in my life. My father was an engineer and was a bit of a workaholic. He instilled in me a work ethic that I worked a lot too. I was a bit of a workaholic as well. But as a young child, I always knew my parents were always available for me. Times were it seemed like a lot simpler back then. We didn't have, I mean, I could get on my bicycle when I was old enough to ride a bike and go as far away as I wanted to go and come back, and there was never any fears of anything happening to me. Life was I grew up in Louisiana, so the life down there was a lot simpler than a lot of places. We did a lot of hunting and fishing and water sports, and it was just a good time to be alive and a good time to be growing up. Um, Through high school, I was always on a college track because I knew I wanted to be an engineer, and so I spent a lot of time studying. But I also had a good time. I had a lot of good group of friends, and we pretty much stayed out of trouble. It was a good life.
Okay. So would you say your times were better than the times kids experience them today? If yes, why?
I feel like it is, and I feel like maybe a lot of the reason why it was easier back then than it is now is I feel like people didn't take things quite so seriously. Now it's if you think about what a child is up against, um, I'm a firm believer that people are who people are. You're not defined by your behavior, not defined by that. I believe that you were designed and given a purpose by God in heaven, and each of us have a role and a responsibility here. I feel like back in the day where I grew up, it wasn't so much, and it was starting to turn, but it wasn't so much about what's in it for me, but how can I help somebody else? How can I serve somebody else? So you weren't so wrapped up in yourself. You were more wrapped up in what you could do for somebody else. And by giving back to people, um, you get a reward inside that I think a lot of people miss out on now. Now people are so wrapped up around their identity of what sexual orientation they are, what race they are, what what they believe in versus just being, and recognizing that every individual and every human being has a value, and and treating each other with respect, and not trying to find um, a reason to to not like somebody, or not want to be involved with somebody. I feel like today we focus more on what divides us and what really puts us together, and I think it's a challenge for kids. I think it's a tremendous amount of pressure for one thing, because they can't just be kids. They can't just grow up. It's there's a lot of pressure on children today.
Okay. Yes, there's a lot of tension going on, especially on the internet about different views, and it's very hard for especially the young ones to receive the right influence. Let's put it that way. So,
Well, that's another thing that we didn't have was internet and didn't have social media. And I've got a friend right now who's in Iceland. They're traveling over there, and he posted all of his pictures. And of course, every picture you see makes it look like everybody's having a great time. And then he put a footnote down at the bottom and said, being completely transparent and honest, we had a big blow up in my family yesterday because we were just all tired and things didn't go right and all that. I just wanted to be honest about what's going on. Well, if you look at social media, people will say things to each other that they would never say to somebody's face. They'll post things out there that are hurtful to others, and then there's also a persona on there that everybody else has it a whole lot better than you do, which makes it a lot of pressure.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Unfortunately, we are surrounded by the environment where we have to pretend things are going
Hmm.
well. And unfortunately, it's not just for the young ones. I've noticed it also amongst the adult ones, the more experienced and elder ones that are following this trend because there's this mutual pressure. If you don't jump on this trend or that kind of environment, you're left out. And then you have the fear that you're not any more important, valued as
Right.
an individual. And yeah, one thing is using LinkedIn, for example, is one of the platforms I used to communicate with people. And I've seen this very strange trend of people posting things because they have to. They have to tell their personal stories, the family stories, so someone else can relate or feel for them. But it's not true. It's just all about trying to get that attention for the time being because this is a trend, and it's very sad, unfortunately.
Yeah, it
It
used to
would be
be
much nicer.
LinkedIn was a lot more professional back when I first got onto it, where it really was discussing ideas and mainly about different technologies and things like that were changing out there, and kind of following each other's career paths and being able to know, who to network with when you're trying to do business. But now you're right; it's become another social platform that's um, maybe a little bit more professional than Facebook, but it's right out there. And it's
Yeah.
not just the young people, it's my generation's doing that as well.
Okay. What would you say is a lesson you've learned or you've received throughout your life that stuck with you and you've applied it throughout your life?
Well, I think probably I thought a lot about that because I read that in the questions that you sent early. And one of the things that and I do a lot of career counseling with people now, particularly people who are looking to change jobs or they're just starting out their careers. And there's a few things that, from my upbringing of watching my father work and knowing how hard he worked and the work ethic that he put into me, growing up in the 60s and early 70s and having the typical, what, you may not even know what the reference is, the Leave It to Beaver, um, 1950s family where the father went out and made the money and the mother stayed home and took care of the kids, and the father put bread on the table and the whole responsibility was to bring home a lot of money. Well, that's the pressure I kind of felt like I was under. So my wife stayed home with our children when they were growing up, and I worked a lot, and I worked a lot of hours. I tried to do what my father did and tried to give my kids the time that they needed as well to be a father. But when it came down to the end of the day, I felt like my primary responsibility was to make money and bring it home and make sure that we had what we needed on the table. I think that one of the biggest lessons I learned is that life's too short for that. And there's phases that you go through as you grow up. So right out of college, you wanted to get a house, you wanted to get married, you wanted to have a family, and you wanted to start climbing maybe a corporate ladder, and that looks really good when you're in your 20s and your 30s, maybe even more so now trying to climb the corporate ladder. You get into your 40s, and then all of a sudden you realize this is when most people have what's called a midlife crisis, and you start to think, well, what's really all this all about? Is it really about just making money? Is it really about who's the highest on the totem pole in the company? And when you get into your 50s, you start to look back and say, I've only got maybe another 10, 15 years left to work. what difference is it going to make? What's when somebody looks at me at the end of the day? What are they going to say about my life? What are my kids going to say about my life? And then you start to realize that nobody goes to their deathbed or to their grave and says, "Boy, I wish I'd worked more hours." Everybody always says, "I wish I'd had my relationships in order where they needed to be. I wish I'd have spent more time with my kids. I wish I would have spent more time with my grandkids. The people who are important in my life, I wish I spent more time with them. My wife, and the things like that. That now I'm retired, and you can fully see that. I mean, one guy told me when I first started working, he says, if you want to know how long you'll be missed if you ended up quitting here and leaving, put your hand in a bucket of water and pull it out and see how long the hole stays there. And it's true.
Hmm.
I mean, even in my own business, the one that I ran for 17 years, it's chugging along. All the guys are there and they're doing great. Now, I'm not saying that the friendships and all have diminished, but they don't need me. And all that time you think, well, boy, they really, really needed me to make things happen. So one of the things that I've come to learn is you need to have a balance in everything. There's a balance in life. You could work 24 hours a day and you still won't get everything done. You still won't make everybody happy. You're still going to make your boss is still not going to, they're going to want more, and but there's a limit, and you need to figure out where that line is and say, I'm going to go this far and I'm not going to go any further. This is where I need to have time to take care of myself, to take care of my family, and take care of the relationships. Because the bottom line is the only thing that's going to last beyond your work is the relationships that you have and the people who are important to you. And I believe also that when you start to get outside yourself and look at ways to serve other people, you find that it's a whole lot more rewarding than the paycheck that's coming in. For instance, right now in my retirement, I'm working. Our church bought some apartments from a school, and they've converted them into low income housing. So a couple of days a week, I go over there and work as a volunteer doing maintenance. I've got my head in toilets. I've got my head in plumbing. I've got my head doing stuff like that. That I mean, a guy with an engineering degree that's run a company and was at one of the highest levels in Fortune 500 aircraft companies out there changing out toilets. Hey, but it's really rewarding because I don't get any pay. There's no financial gain for me, but I get thanked by at least five people every time I go over there and do something. And I feel like I'm giving back to somebody else and it's making a difference in somebody's life who probably wouldn't have that difference otherwise.
Going back to what you just said, what's your thought on this? Having a fulfilling life.
Well, I think you need to have realistic goals. I think you need to recognize that you're not ever going to be the highest guy on the totem pole. You're not ever going to have more money than everybody else. So now it's a level of, okay, well, what is enough? And for me, what I've found is having enough to be able to be comfortable and not be dependent on somebody else, but to be able to give back and serve other people in a way that gets me outside myself. I think a lot of the reasons why people have a lot of emotional issues right now is they're so wrapped up on their self and what's going on in their life rather than going and getting involved in somebody else's life and saying, what can I do to help you? And for me, one of the things that's been extremely rewarding is being able to, like a young person who's looking to start a career, or there's another person who's looking at, I don't like my career, I want to change jobs. How can I help them figure that out and make that come together? How can I go and take care of a single mother who's trying to raise two kids that can barely make ends meet, and they're living in this low income apartment, and they've got a toilet that's messed up, or they've got a shelf that needs to be installed, or they've got some other mechanical issue with their car or whatever, and I can go over there and help them do that. I mean, that's extremely rewarding because you know that for that person, you've made a difference. And there's, I think about a lot of the social justice issues where people want to go out and change the world. Just change one person. If you can make one person better or do something for one person, I mean, that spreads. But we always think that when you do these grandiose plans, any difference you can make for an individual is rewarding. And to me, that's the important thing. Now, of course, when you go to work for somebody, having been an employer, you want an employee that's going to give you an honest day's work. I mean, I don't like to see our employees when they're working sitting there and trolling on social media when they should be working. Now, I don't have a problem with them doing that outside, and I don't have a problem with them doing things, but I think for also to have a fulfilling life is to know that when you've gone to work and you're taking a paycheck from somebody, that you gave that person an honest day's work and everything that they need to have. And then at the end of the day, let it go and go home and realize that you were paid to do a job, you did a job, you did the job to the best of your ability. But when you hit the end of the day and you hit that time frame, which is the line that I was telling you earlier, we need to draw and say, I'm only going to give so much. You need to be able to let it go and go home and be there for your family and be there for your friends.
So, what would you say? Times have obviously changed slightly. People are now looking more to have a comfortable life, or at least not comfortable career, but a career where they recognize for their work. So let's say an honest person comes in and delivers the job to the best abilities. How would you look at this if the person does everything and the employer is not treating them in the right way? How would you say younger people should deal in those situations?
I think there's a couple of things that person really needs to look at is do an honest assessment and say, am I looking for something that's unreasonable? And am I asking an employer to give me something that isn't possible, or it's something that isn't isn't an equivalent with what they think they're worth. One of the things that I always found out, my father gave me some advice when I first started working. He says, never tell anybody how much you make and never ask anybody else how much you make, and you'll live a happy life. And the reason why is because as long as you're satisfied with what you're getting, what difference does it make what somebody else is getting? And I had another friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, who knew what everybody else made, and he was never happy because he always felt like, well, I'm better than that other guy, and he's making more than me, so why is that like that? And he would go gripe and complain and yell at the bosses, saying I deserve more because I'm better than this other guy. But he wouldn't look at the guy who was better than him that was making less than him. It was always the other way around. So I think, all people, young world, need to have realistic expectations of what a job is and what you can get out of it. I really believe, and I've been a boss and I've been a worker, that nobody goes to work every day and says, let me see how bad I can mess up, or let me see how bad I can destroy an organization, or let me see how well I can demoralize somebody else. Everybody goes in there with the idea that I want to do a good job. That's a boss included. And sometimes bosses' skills are limited, and I think that having open and honest conversations with a boss, if you're a young person starting out and you feel like you're not getting treated well, or you don't feel like you're getting the shake that you deserve, or your performance isn't being recognized, is be able to sit down with that boss and talk to them about it. If communication's not possible with that boss, that could be an indicator that that's not a good boss to have, and maybe you need to think about moving on and going somewhere else. I think that a communication streak has to go both ways. So if you're an employee, you gotta be willing to go and make a boss aware of what's going on. Some of the best conversations I had were people who worked for me came in and said, "Hey, you're not doing this right," or "I don't think you did this right," and I could go and look inside myself and say, "You know what? I could do that better." I mean, everybody needs to improve, bosses and workers, but everybody needs to be realistic too. I remember having a guy that I hired at Lockheed Martin. He came right out of college, and he wanted to know how soon he could be the vice president, general manager of the company. I mean, that's not going to happen. I mean, you got to get an experience and you got to get things going. You got to prove yourself. And it takes time. And there's not a recipe that you can give somebody that says that. But a lot of times they want that. Say, well, if I accomplish this, this, and this, and this, will I have your job? Well, yeah, those are some things you need to accomplish. But, you got to get some experience in it. You got to do things. So there's also an unrealistic expectation that sometimes I think people have too that needs to be ferreted out and understand and be honest with yourself as much as anybody else is what I'm asking for unreasonable, and am I putting some kind of undue pressure on my boss to tell me something that there's no way he can promise anyway, and then when it doesn't come true I feel like I've been violated. I've seen a lot of young people do that, where people I've coached that have come in and said, I feel like my boss hates me. Well, tell me a little bit about what's going on there. He says, well, I went and tried to talk to him about this, and this was the answer he gave me, and he couldn't promise me that, I would get a raise or a promotion on the next thing if I did this, this, and this, and this. Well, there's a lot of factors that play into all that stuff. But I think that every employee should be able to get, and I think that every employer should be able to go say, hey, this is really good. You did a good job. I'm proud of you. I think what you're doing is the right thing. And that to me carries more weight than a salary does with many people.
Okay. So what career advice or general advice would you give someone who would want to enter a profession in general, or someone who would want to be an engineer like yourself?
Well, one of the things that I just coached a guy last week who was trying to find a job, and he's been through some rough times. He went through a divorce and had some other personal things that were going on for him, and he wasn't really sure what he wanted to go look for. He said, I'm interviewing for jobs. I said, well, what jobs are you interviewing for? Well, this, and this, and this. I said, but do you even like doing that? Well, I don't know. I said, well, that's one of the things you got to sit down and think about. What is it that you feel like you have a talent in, and what is it that you like doing, and try to marry those things together. So if you're an engineer or a young person who thinks they want to be in engineering, well, why do you want to be in engineering? What is it about that attracts you? Like let's say somebody wanted to be a mechanical engineer, and I asked them that, and they came back and said, well, I really like getting my hands on things. I like getting my hands dirty. I want to be able to see parts come together and a new assembly and a new design come out. Okay, well, do you think you would like to sit behind a desk and draw up the designs, or do you think you'd like to be out there where they're actually putting things together? Well, you got to be honest with yourself and think about those things that you think you would like to do, and then start meeting with people who are in that career and ask them, well, what kind of job should I look for in order to find something that's going to scratch my itch? One of the things my father taught me when I was a young boy was how to sail. And the way he taught me to sail is he said, if you're going across this large body of water, look for something tall that is in the direction where you want to sail to and aim for that. That may not be exactly where you want to go, but it's in the right direction. So I tell these people who are looking at an engineering career, well, what are the things that you think you would like to do? Well, I think I'd like to sit behind a drawing board and draw, and I'd like to be able to run calculations. Okay, well, then you need to look for a design engineering job. And they go in there and they start doing that, and they realize, well, boy, I got to go out in the shop and see them making things, and there are lots of things that are messed up out there that I think I can do a better job of showing them how to put things together. Well, that's a different kind of mechanical engineering job. It's still a mechanical engineering job, and that, using the sailing analogy, you've headed towards a point. Now you're going to veer off a little bit and go in a little bit different direction. But look for the thing that's going to bring you the most joy and satisfaction, and the thing that matches your skill set. And also, don't worry about money. Don't get all wrapped up about, well, what's going to pay the most, or which job's going to do the most. Go in there and do a really good job at it, and the money will follow. But there's no amount of money you can pay somebody to be miserable and do a job they hate. Whereas if you love a job, you don't even think about the money. The money comes, and as you do a better job, you get rewarded, and it shows. Bosses want the guy who's going to do the best job, who's going to make them look the best, and so they'll see that, and you'll get moved up, and you'll get the pay that goes with it.
So really good advice here. Let's talk about habits. What's a habit that has had a positive impact on your life, and how did you develop it?
Well, probably the biggest habit that I've got that has had a positive look on my life is I get up in the morning early, and I take time to renew myself spiritually. I spend time reading through the Bible. That's one of the things that I find that brings a lot of peace to me. There's a lot of good stories in there that go over things that are very practical and what how to deal with different pressures in life. That I try to apply those, and I try to think about at the beginning of my day, what can I do today to make a difference, and how do I take what I'm learning and apply it to my life, and how does that impact how I treat people and how I work with people, and at the end of the day, how can I have a positive influence on somebody? Those are the things that, to me, have made the most sense, because when you start doing that, it takes you outside yourself. You don't worry so much about, what am I going to do to get ahead? What am I going to do to to do things that are outside beyond my control? One of the things that I've come to realize as I get older is the amount of stuff that we control is significantly less than the things that we don't control. 2020 was a good example of that. I couldn't do anything about COVID. It shows up and it racked my business. It changed our business plan completely. We were making big tools and steel structures for the automotive industry and the aerospace industry, and both of those were racked by COVID. The aerospace industry was decimated. I mean, nobody was flying anywhere. Boeing had problems with the 737 at that point, and we had to change our whole business plan to where we started making plastic shields that would go into the schools so that kids could go back to school. We'd never made a plastic part in our life before that. That was something totally new. And would I have chosen that? Absolutely not. But that was kind of thrust upon us because nobody could control that. When you sit down and you think about just hiring people and whether people stay and whether people are happy there, there's things you can do to set up the environment, but at the same time, you don't control the people. The people are going to be what people are going to go do. I don't know for sure that the sun's going to come up tomorrow for me. I could pass away after we have this conversation. Who knows? Those are all things that I don't control. So you need to figure out, how do you let go of those things and just hang on to the things you do control and do the best to do what's there. And those are all practices that I've learned as I've gotten older, and learned to distinguish between the two. What is something you can control, and what is something that you can't control? And don't get so upset about the things you can't control.
Okay, so on that note, not being able to control things, would there still be something that you wish you could go back in time and do differently?
Yeah, there's lots of things. I mean, I wish I hadn't learned some of the lessons I learned so late in life. I wish I'd learned them earlier. I wish I'd have learned that balancing out and not having to put in 70 and 80 hours a week in a job to be able to be successful would have allowed me to have more time at home with my kids when they were in high school. And I was in a pretty high pressure job at that point in time at Lockheed. I was home a lot, but my mind was never here. I wasn't present. So, I mean, learning those things and learning that a lot of that stuff was way outside my control. There are things that I couldn't do anything about, but still it concerned me and worried me, kept me up at night. Um, Learning those things and knowing now what the impact is, and looking at it realistically, I think our life would have been a whole lot better during that time frame had I done things differently.
Okay. And do you think there's something society could do to make things better for the younger generation?
That's a really good question. That's a pretty deep question too. I think a lot of it is that somehow we've got to get to the point where we aren't looking at defining people into groups and defining people into niches, or defining people by their behavior or whatever, and just recognize that people are people, and we're all trying to do the best we can. There's some that aren't educated as well, and there's some stereotypes out there that still cause issues. If we take the racial issue for one, I mean, there's as long as people are still alive, there's going to be racial tensions, just because, not because of race, but because people are different, and we tend to gravitate towards the people that are most like us. Somewhere along the line, we need to recognize that it's okay to be different, and that doesn't mean that if I'm different than somebody else that I hate you, or if I have a different opinion, there's no hate there. It's we start to see the good in everybody. I think I think if we can start to drop some of those barriers, it's going to make it a whole lot easier for children. I think that the family unit's important too. I think having families that are engaged and responsible when they're raising their children, I think makes a big difference. I think that that's something that could make life better. I feel like there's a lot of pressure on people now that says that, well, a family's really not all that important. I think it is important, and I think it ought to be celebrated as families stay together and do things together and nurture children, be involved in their lives, and listen to what their struggles are and what's going on, and not buy into what the social media shows them as here's what life should look like, and yours doesn't look like that, so therefore you got a problem. Um, I think that by looking at the things that divide us is the wrong thing to do. We need to look at the things that unite us, and the things that make us the same, and the goals that we have the same, regardless of male, female, black, white, um, Jewish, Christian, whatever. Whatever the separation is quit looking at all those differences and start looking at, well, what is it that unifies us, and focus on those things, and then build upon that.
That's a powerful message. Mm. And on a final note, what piece of advice or wisdom would you give to younger people?
There's a couple things I would say. I think one of them is enjoy every stage of life. Don't keep looking at. I know when I was growing up, I kept thinking, "Oh, I can't wait until I can drive." Then once I could drive, I can't wait until I can graduate and move out on my own. I can't wait until I have kids and do this. I can't wait until I reach this level in my professional career. I can't wait until I own my own house. I mean, there's all kinds of things that are there are things that they're not. There's nothing wrong with those, and it's not bad, but enjoy the moment that you have right now. When your children are little, I remember, and we've got several friends that have young children that are, they're crying all the time, have to have their diapers changed all the time, and you're not sleeping a lot at night. You're sitting there saying, "Well, I can't wait for this to be over." Believe me, in the blink of an eye, it's over with. There is so much that life is really short. It really is. It seems like when you're doing something you don't enjoy that it lasts forever, but it doesn't. Nothing does. It goes by so quick. We have three granddaughters now. The oldest one's going to be 7 in August, and it seems like just yesterday she was a brand new baby. And I think about my own children. I mean, they've been gone. The oldest one's been gone longer than he was at home. And I sit there and think, wow, I mean, how did that go by so quick? I lost both of my parents 4 years ago. And so now I'm the oldest person in my family. And I'm looking around thinking, wow, the, I'm the top of the chain now as far as age goes. And you start to think, man, it just went by in a blink of an eye. And if you spend all your time sitting there wondering about, well, how do I maximize and move out and wish away all your joy of what's going on during that particular moment, you look back and you think, man, I spent a whole lot of time worrying about things that I didn't need to worry about, or always hoping for things that didn't really matter. Don't take life so seriously either. I mean, recognize that and give grace to people. People are going to make mistakes. People are going to hurt you, and you're going to hurt other people. What can you do to to show grace to those people? If a boss hurts you when you're working or says something to you that you didn't like, show a little bit of grace and go talk to them about it. But recognize that I really believe everybody's trying to do the best they can. I don't think people go into life with the intent that I want to see how bad I can screw up and how bad I can hurt others. And show that grace and not let that linger and hold on to it. And then, as far as comparisons, learn how to be happy in yourself and with what your station is in life, and not look towards what everybody else is showing as a great life and something that's positive. Going back to what my dad told me, don't ask people how much they make and don't tell anybody how much you make and you'll be happy. Well, that goes towards a lot of things. Don't go out there and look and say, man, this guy's got a great vacation going on Facebook. And so, man, I feel like I've been slighted because I don't. Be happy with where you are and learn. If you're not happy with where you are, try to figure out, well, what can I do to get into that position? And the last thing that I would say that is really important is that, and this is something for anybody who's, I know a lot of people live on a lot of credit right now, and they go out and they purchase and buy things that get them into hock way up over their head, and then they're miserable because they can't get out of it. Learn how to spend less than what you make. It doesn't really matter what you make; it's what you spend is what's the big deal there. I mean, we've had periods in our marriage and in our life where particularly when we started the business, we had virtually no income coming in, and we learned to control our spending. And then as the income went up, we still controlled our spending, but learning how to live and be satisfied with what you have rather than what you don't have is key. I think those are all things that can lead to a fulfilling life. They can make you happy. They can make you successful in every way, not just in business, but just in life in general. And those are the things that I wish I'd have paid more attention to when I was younger. And those are things that I try to tell everybody when they ask me those questions.
Paul, I really wanted to thank you for taking the time to speak to me today. There's some really powerful messages in that interview.
Well, I hope
Mm,
it's useful to somebody. I mean, that's the reason why I agreed to do this. Is like I told you, I like to do a lot of volunteer work where I give back, and if this helps somebody, that's great. I really hope it does. Um, Man, I've been through the school hard knocks, and I think it's good to learn from somebody else's hard knocks and having to go through them yourself.